I've never been the type to venture into Tinder dates, but after a lot of insistence from my friends, I decided to give it a try. It was a Friday night when I met Lara. Her photo on the app showed a stunning woman with long dark hair and a smile that seemed to light up the room. We chatted for a few days before deciding to meet in person. We chose a small, cozy bar in the city center. I arrived first and, while waiting, tried to calm my nerves with a drink. Soon I saw Lara walk in. She was even more beautiful in person. Her eyes, a deep blue, seemed to observe everything with a disturbing intensity, but I attributed that to my initial nervousness. We greeted each other with a shy hug and sat at a table near the window. The conversation flowed surprisingly well. She was smart, funny, and had a peculiar way of telling stories that captivated me. We talked about our interests, our jobs, and discovered some curious coincidences, such as our mutual love for horror movies and mystery books. However, as the night went on, I began to notice small things that made me uncomfortable. There was something in Lara's eyes that was different. Sometimes, when she laughed, her eyes would twinkle in an almost inhuman way, as if a hidden fire burned within them. The smile, which initially seemed welcoming, suddenly seemed to hide something sinister, but I chalked it up to my imagination. I ordered a second round of drinks, trying to shake off the unease that was starting to creep in. Lara accepted, and we continued talking. She told me about her hobbies, mentioning a fascination with the occult and ancient pagan religions. I found it curious but not strange, until she began describing an altar she had at home, filled with ritualistic artifacts. She spoke about it with such enthusiasm that it was hard not to feel a chill. It was past midnight when Lara suggested we go to her place. She said she had some special drinks she wanted me to try, and, driven by curiosity and the strange magnetism she exuded, I agreed. On the way to her house, I felt a mix of excitement and fear. Something inside me said I should decline the invitation, but the way Lara looked at me, as if she knew something I didn't, was hypnotizing. We arrived at her house, an old and imposing structure, partially hidden by tall trees and an iron fence. We entered, and the first thing I noticed was the smell. A sweet, nauseating aroma seemed to permeate the walls. Lara led me through the living room, decorated with antique furniture and an unlit fireplace, to a smaller room where the altar was. I froze upon seeing the objects spread out on the altar. Black candles, animal skulls, and symbols I didn't recognize. Before I could react, Lara placed a glass of wine in my hand, smiling enigmatically. "Try it," she said. "It's a special recipe." I raised the glass, hesitant, and drank. The taste was strong, almost metallic, but not unpleasant. Soon after, I felt a strange drowsiness overcome me. I tried to speak, but my vision began to darken. The last thing I saw was Lara's smile, now clearly malevolent, before I blacked out completely. I woke up with sunlight streaming through my bedroom curtains. My eyes were heavy, and my head throbbed. It took a few seconds to realize where I was. My own bed, in my own apartment. I sat up slowly, trying to clear the fog from my mind. How had I gotten there? The clock on the nightstand read 10 o'clock in the morning. The memories of the previous night were jumbled, like someone had rummaged through my memory and left everything out of order. I remembered the date with Lara, the cozy bar, and the pleasant conversation that had taken a disturbing turn at some point. But what happened next? The altar, the black candles, the metallic taste of the wine. I put my hands on my face, trying to force my mind to remember. Fragments of memories began to emerge, shapeless and confusing. I saw flashes of images, Lara whispering incomprehensible words, the flicker of candles casting dancing shadows on the walls, strange symbols drawn on the floor around me. I got up, feeling my body heavy, and went to the bathroom. I looked at myself in the mirror and noticed a small cut on my forehead, something I didn't remember doing. As the cold water of the shower ran over me, more disturbing images began to emerge. Lara, with her shimmering eyes, moved gracefully around an altar. Her hands were covered in a shiny red substance. She murmured in an ancient language, the sounds reverberating through the room in a way that made the hairs on my neck stand up. There were others too, indistinct shadows watching the ritual, faces blurred in my memory. I tried to recall more details, but the headache became unbearable. Each fragment of memory was like a knife stabbed into my mind. I left the shower and got dressed, determined to seek answers. I grabbed my phone to call Lara, but hesitated. What would I say? What if I had just drunk too much and imagined things? I sat on the living room couch, staring at the phone in my hand. I decided to send a message, something casual, asking if she was okay. I waited for a response that never came. The silence of the apartment was almost deafening, and the feeling that something terrible had happened grew inside me. That night, every noise seemed amplified. The creak of the floorboards, the sound of the wind against the windows, even my own breathing. I lay in bed but couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of the ritual, Lara's gaze, and the sinister altar. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just a bad dream, but something inside me knew it was real. Then I felt something even stranger. Presence. I opened my eyes and looked around the room, but saw nothing. Even so, the feeling of being watched was intense. I decided to get up and turn on all the lights in the apartment. Nothing seemed out of place, but the feeling didn't go away. The next morning, exhaustion took over. I went to work, but my mind was far away, fixated on the memories of the previous night and the enigmatic figure of Lara. I needed to find out what really happened and how I had gotten home. The days that followed were a blur of restlessness and growing fear. I returned to work, trying to cling to the normalcy of routine, but the events of that night haunted me like a persistent shadow. I began to realize that something was really wrong when the strange events intensified. The first time was in my apartment one afternoon. I was on the couch, trying to watch a movie to distract my mind. Suddenly, I heard a soft noise, like something sliding across the floor. I looked around and saw that the armchair in the corner was facing me. I clearly remembered leaving it facing the window. I frowned, getting up to straighten it. But when I touched it, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was no logical explanation for that. That night, the whispers began. Lying in bed, I tried to ignore the feeling of being watched. I closed my eyes and started hearing low murmurs, as if several voices were conversing right next to my ear. I opened my eyes and sat up, but there was no one there. The feeling of being watched intensified, but I couldn't see anything unusual. Each night, the whispers grew louder, filling the room with an unpleasant sound of indistinct voices. It was impossible to understand what they were saying, but there was a sense of urgency and despair in them. During the day, I began to notice objects out of place. The book I had left on the coffee table appeared on the shelf. My shoes that were by the door were found in the bedroom. Once, I saw a shadow move quickly across the kitchen wall while I was making coffee. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. Each day, the feeling that something or someone was with me grew stronger. One night, while trying to sleep, I felt the bed sink slightly beside me, as if someone had lain down next to me. I froze, my heart beating wildly. Slowly, I turned my head and, in the dark, saw the vague silhouette of a figure. It had no face, just an indistinct form that seemed to dissolve into the darkness. I blinked, and the figure disappeared, but the fear I felt remained. At work, things were no different. My colleagues began to notice my tired and distracted appearance. They asked if I was okay, but how could I explain what was happening without sounding crazy? The office lights flickered when I walked by, and once, when I was alone in the conference room, I felt a cold hand touch my shoulder. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. The events culminated on a stormy night. The wind was blowing hard outside, and the thunder echoed through the city. I was sitting on the couch, trying to read a book, when the lights began to flicker. I got up to grab a flashlight, but before I could reach it, all the lights went out. I stood still, breathing heavily in the dark. Suddenly, the whispers returned, louder and clearer than ever. They seemed to come from every corner of the apartment. I covered my ears, trying to block them out, but it was useless. I groped my way to the window, hoping the lightning would give me some guidance. A flash illuminated the room, and in the reflection of the glass, I saw the same indistinct figure standing behind me. I turned quickly, but again there was nothing. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would explode. The presence was tangible, almost suffocating. Suddenly, I felt pressure on my chest, as if something was trying to crush me. I fell to my knees, struggling to breathe. The whispers grew louder, until, with one last desperate scream, the pressure ceased and everything went silent. I remained there, on my knees on the floor, panting and trembling. I knew I couldn't go on like this. Something had to be done. I needed to understand what Lara had done to me that night and how to stop the supernatural events that were destroying my life. I gathered all my strength and decided that the only solution was to confront Lara again, seek answers, and if necessary, fight against the demons she had unleashed. The days following the strange events were marked by a growing obsession with Lara. I woke up and went to bed thinking about her. Her image was etched in my mind like a painful and permanent tattoo. No matter what I did, Lara was always there, like a ghost I couldn't exorcise. At work, my colleagues began to notice my distraction. Simple tasks that I used to complete effortlessly now seemed like insurmountable mountains. My hands trembled, my concentration waned, and any attempt to focus was sabotaged by the memory of Lara's enigmatic smile and her shimmering blue eyes. What once seemed like a common memory of a date was now a constant and oppressive presence. The nights were even worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I dreamed of Lara. In my dreams, we were back at her house, in the midst of increasingly macabre and detailed rituals. I saw Lara surrounded by shadows, chanting in ancient languages, with symbols glowing around her. I felt the presence of other entities, indistinct figures watching with invisible eyes. And always, at the center of it all, was me, trapped in a cycle of fear and fascination. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, feeling an inexplicable attraction to Lara that left me confused and terrified. It wasn't just a memory of desire. It was something visceral, as if my very soul was being drawn to her. My attempts to ignore the dreams were futile. The more I tried to push her out of my thoughts, the stronger the attraction became. I began to neglect my social life. Friends called me out, worried about my sudden change in behavior, but I declined. I lied, saying I was tired or busy, but the truth was that my obsession with Lara consumed all my time and energy. I spent hours on the internet, researching the occult, ancient rituals, anything that might give me a clue about what she had done to me. Each night, Lara's presence became more tangible. I smelled her perfume in the air, a sweet and nauseating fragrance that seemed to permeate my skin. I heard her voice whispering my name, a soft call that made my heart race. I saw shadows moving in the corners of my apartment, shadows that had her shape but disappeared as soon as I turned to look. My sanity was hanging by a thread. I began to see Lara everywhere, on the street, at work, in reflections of windows and mirrors. Once, while driving, I saw her face in the rearview mirror, her eyes watching me with disturbing intensity. I turned sharply, almost losing control of the car, but there was no one in the back seat. The attraction to Lara became unbearable. It was like an invisible magnet pulling me towards her, stronger every day. I felt a desperate need to see her again, to understand what she had done to me, to confront the truth behind her sinister smile and hypnotizing eyes. On one of the most disturbing nights, I dreamed I was back at Lara's house. She led me to the altar, where candles burned with blue and white flames. She held my hand and whispered something in a language I didn't understand. I felt my body being drawn to her, unable to resist. When I woke up, I still felt the pressure of her hand in mine, as if the connection between us was real and tangible. I woke up determined. I needed to find Lara, confront her, and understand what was happening. I couldn't continue living with this obsession consuming my mind and soul. Dressed and determined, I picked up the phone and called her. I waited, listening to each ring with growing anxiety. When she finally answered, I heard her soft, seductive voice on the other end. "Hello, you again," she said, almost as if she had been expecting my call. "Lara, we need to talk." "I need to see you," I replied, my voice trembling with a mix of fear and desire. She laughed softly. "Sure, come see me. I'll be waiting." I hung up the phone, feeling a mix of relief and terror. My journey to confront Lara was about to begin, and I knew there was no turning back. The inexplicable and uncontrollable attraction I felt for her was about to lead me to a confrontation with the unknown, and I needed answers before my sanity completely abandoned me. After the disturbing call with Lara, I knew I needed to gather as much information as possible before seeing her again. My sleepless nights, the supernatural events, and the growing obsession with her demanded answers. I decided to investigate thoroughly who Lara was and what was behind her involvement with the occult. I started by searching her name on the internet. Searching for Lara wasn't enough, so I added details I remembered from our conversation. Occult, rituals, ancient symbols. To my surprise, I found an article on a blog specialized in supernatural events. The title read, "Pagan Rituals and Strange Disappearances." In the middle of the text, an old photo of a group of people gathered around an altar caught my attention. There she was, younger but unmistakable. The article mentioned a series of inexplicable disappearances in the region about 10 years ago. People who got involved with an occult group led by a woman named Lara. The disappeared were usually found in a state of confusion, unable to remember what had happened. Some reported visions of dark rituals and supernatural entities. Others were simply never found. I decided to look for public records. I went to the city library and searched old newspaper archives. I found more mentions of disappearances and strange events, always linked to Lara and her group. The more I read, the greater the sense of urgency grew. It was clear that she was not just an ordinary woman with a peculiar interest in the occult. She was something more, something dangerous. I returned to the internet, looking for any clues about Lara's group. I found an obscure forum where people discussed supernatural experiences. I posted a message, describing what was happening to me and asking if anyone knew Lara. I received several responses, some dismissible, but one caught my attention. A user with the pseudonym Watcher claimed to have known someone who was also enchanted by Lara. I arranged to meet Watcher at a discreet cafe. I arrived early, anxious and suspicious. When he finally arrived, a thin man with gray hair and a worried look, he seemed burdened by a dark story. We sat down and he began to speak. "I met Lara many years ago," he said, his voice low and tense. "My friend Michael got involved with her. At first, he was enchanted, like everyone else. But soon the dreams began, the visions, and then the rituals. I asked what had happened to Michael. Watcher sighed, his eyes lost in painful memories. Michael disappeared. We found his diary, full of disturbing descriptions of rituals and encounters with entities he couldn't explain. It was the last time we saw him. I showed him a photo of Lara I found on the blog. He confirmed it was the same woman. "She has something sinister," he said. "She's not just a practitioner of the occult. There's something darker at play. Be careful." The conversation with Watcher left me shaken but determined. I needed to know more about the rituals and symbols Lara used. I returned to the library and found a book on pagan religions and the occult. There, I recognized some of the symbols I had seen on Lara's altar. They were part of invocation rituals used to summon entities from other planes. These rituals involved sacrifices and pacts that bound the participant's soul to these entities. Each new discovery increased my fear and fascination. Lara was a powerful and dangerous figure, involved in practices that challenged reality as I knew it. I needed to understand the rituals and find a way to protect myself. Each day, I felt the attraction to her grow, but now it was mixed with a deep fear of what could happen if I didn't find the truth and break the spell. It was clear that Lara was not just a curious person about the occult. She was an experienced practitioner, involved in something much bigger and more dangerous. My investigation revealed a web of secrets and disappearances, but there were still many unanswered questions. I knew I needed to confront her, but not without being fully prepared first. My life and sanity depended on it. The investigation was leading me to dead ends. I knew I needed help from someone who truly understood the occult world Lara was immersed in. I returned to the forum where I found Watcher and left a desperate message. I needed an expert in the occult, someone with deep knowledge of spells and rituals. Fortunately, I received a quick response from a user with the pseudonym Orion. Orion suggested a meeting at an esoteric bookstore in the city center. It was a place I had passed many times but had never noticed its existence. The discreet facade hid a vast collection of ancient books, crystals, and occult artifacts. When I entered, the doorbell chimed softly, and I was greeted by an atmosphere charged with mystery. Orion was a middle-aged man with long gray hair tied in a ponytail. His eyes were a deep green, conveying a calm and ancient wisdom. He greeted me with a firm handshake and a penetrating gaze that seemed to read my soul. "You must be the guy having trouble with a witch named Lara," he said, his voice low and serene. I nodded, feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. We sat at a table in the back of the bookstore, surrounded by books and candles. Orion began to talk, explaining about spells, rituals, and Lara's possible intentions. "Lara is more than just a practitioner," he began. "She is an adept of the dark arts, involved in invocation rituals that attract entities from other planes. These rituals usually require a sacrifice, a pact that binds the participant's soul to the invoked entity." I asked what that meant for me. Orion sighed, choosing his words carefully. "You may have been marked during one of Lara's rituals. These rituals create a powerful and dangerous connection between you and her. That's why you can't get her out of your mind, and why you're experiencing these supernatural events." He explained that Lara had probably used a binding spell, one of the oldest and most powerful spells of control and influence. This type of spell traps the victim in a cycle of obsession and dependency, making it almost impossible to escape the practitioner's influence. "But why me?" I asked, frustration evident in my voice. "What does she want from me?" Orion leaned forward, his eyes fixed on mine. "Lara may be using you as an anchor for her invocations. Your energy, your fear, and your obsession fuel her rituals. The more you think about her, the more you dream of her, the stronger the connection becomes. And this connection is what allows her to control and manipulate you. The feeling of being trapped in an invisible web intensified. I needed to find a way to break the spell, to free myself from this oppressive influence. I asked Orion if there was anything I could do. "There are ways to break the bond," he said, his voice a little more hopeful. "But it won't be easy. First, you need to strengthen your mind and spirit. Lara is using your fear against you. You need to learn to control that fear, to resist the attraction you feel for her." Orion gave me an old book full of symbols and protection spells. "Study this. It will help you understand the rituals and protect yourself from Lara's influence. You will also need to perform a purification ritual, something that can weaken the bond between you." I spent hours in the bookstore, absorbing as much knowledge as possible. Orion taught me how to create a protection circle using salt and sacred herbs, and to recite spells to strengthen my spirit. He also warned me that confronting Lara directly would be dangerous, but perhaps inevitable. "She knows you're resisting," he said, "and she won't give up easily. Be prepared for the worst." I left the bookstore feeling a mix of hope and fear. I now had a glimpse of what I was facing and some tools to fight, but I knew the battle would be difficult. With every step I took, I felt Lara's presence stronger, as if she was aware of my intentions. I decided I was ready for the confrontation. I needed to find Lara again, armed with the knowledge and protection Orion had provided. I knew it would be dangerous, but there was no other option. My sanity, my life depended on it. The following days were marked by a constant malaise, as if my mind was always on the brink of the abyss. Every night, the nightmares and flashbacks became more intense and vivid, revealing terrifying fragments of Lara's rituals and intentions. The nightmares began with a sensation of freefall, as if I was being sucked into a whirlwind of shadows. When I finally stopped falling, I found myself back in that sinister room with the altar at the center. The black candles cast a flickering light, creating shadows that seemed to come to life and move around me. In one of the nightmares, Lara stood before the altar, her eyes shining with a frightening intensity. She recited words in an ancient and unknown language, her voice low and hissing like the wind on a stormy night. I felt trapped, unable to move or speak, just watching as the ritual unfolded. Suddenly, I glimpsed the true purpose of the ritual. In short, intense flashes, I saw Lara drawing complex symbols on the floor, each emitting a dark glow. Around her, indistinct figures watched, their forms hidden in the shadows. Lara raised a dagger, and with a precise movement, cut her own arm, letting the blood drip onto the symbols. The blood spread, coming to life, forming patterns I couldn't understand. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing. The images of the rituals still burned in my mind. During the day, the flashbacks assaulted me without warning. I could be in the middle of a meeting or walking down the street, and suddenly, I was transported back to that dark and oppressive room. I smelled burnt wax and blood, heard the indistinct whispers of the figures in the shadows, and saw Lara's eyes, always watching me. Each nightmare revealed a little more. One night, I saw Lara holding a strange amulet, murmuring spells as the object glowed with a bluish light. I knew that amulet was important, a key to understanding her objectives. Another night, I saw myself participating in the ritual, lying in the center of the stone circle, unable to resist as Lara traced symbols on my skin with the dagger's tip. The nightmares left me exhausted, and the lack of sleep only worsened my situation. I felt as if I was on the brink of madness, unable to distinguish between the real and the imagined. But something inside me knew I had to continue. I had to understand what Lara was doing. One night, the nightmare was clearer than ever. I saw Lara standing before a large figure made of shadows, an entity that seemed to pulse with dark energy. She spoke to the entity, promising it something in exchange for power. I realized then that Lara was using the rituals to invoke and control this entity, and I was a crucial piece in her plan. My fear, my obsession, and my energy were fueling the ritual, making it more powerful. I woke up with a scream, my body trembling. I needed to find the amulet, the key to breaking the spell. I felt time was running out, that every night Lara grew stronger and her control over me more intense. I turned to the book Orion gave me, looking for a purification ritual that could help me. With the book's instructions, I prepared a protection circle on my apartment floor. I lit white candles around it and sat in the center, reciting the purification spells Orion had taught me. I felt a slight wave of warmth run through my body, like an invisible barrier being raised between me and Lara's influence. That night, the nightmares were less intense but still present. I saw Lara, frustrated, trying to break through the barrier I had raised. Her eyes shone with anger, and I felt a wave of determination grow inside me. I needed to continue. I needed to find a way to face her and break the spell before it was too late. Each nightmare, each flashback, revealed more about Lara's rituals and intentions. It was clear she wanted to control the dark entity to gain power, and I was the key to that. I knew I couldn't delay the confrontation any longer. I needed to face Lara, discover the truth, and, if possible, break the spell she had cast on me. It was a cold, cloudy night when I decided to return to Lara's house. The path there seemed darker and more oppressive than last time. I parked the car a few blocks away, my heart pounding wildly. Every step I took towards the house seemed to echo in my head, as if the very air was charged with heavy and malevolent energy. The house was shrouded in shadows, only a few candles lit in the windows casting a faint, flickering light. I approached the door, hesitant but determined. I knocked, and the door opened almost immediately, as if Lara had been expecting my arrival. She stood there in the doorway, her enigmatic smile and eyes shining with that disturbing intensity. "I knew you would come back," she said softly, as if our meeting was inevitable. I entered the house, feeling a chill run down my spine. The interior was exactly as I remembered, but there was something even more sinister in the air. Lara led me to the altar room, where the black candles were lit, casting dancing shadows on the walls. "You have many questions, don't you?" she said, moving gracefully around the room. "But I don't know if you're ready for the answers." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "What did you do to me, Lara? What are these rituals? And why me?" She laughed softly, as if my confusion was amusing to her. "You're special," she said, stopping in front of the altar. "Your fear, your obsession, your energy, all of it fuels the power of the rituals. You are the anchor that connects this world to the other." As she spoke, I began to realize the true extent of her power. The shadows around her seemed to take form, moving with a will of their own. There was a presence in the air, something ancient and malevolent, an entity I could only glimpse in my nightmares. "You're trying to control this entity," I said, my voice trembling. "You're using my energy to feed it." Lara nodded, the smile fading. "Yes, and it's working. With your fear and your obsession, I can achieve unimaginable power." I tried to back away, but my legs were heavy, as if rooted to the ground. Lara raised her hand, and I felt a crushing pressure on my chest. "Don't think you can escape now," she said, her voice now cold and authoritative. "You came to me, and now you will stay until the ritual is complete." I remembered Orion's teachings, the protection circle, and the purification spells. With tremendous effort, I managed to recite one of the spells. I felt the pressure ease slightly, But Lara just laughed. "Do you think those words can stop me?" she said, advancing slowly. "You underestimate the true power of a powerful witch." Suddenly, the room seemed to spin around me. The shadows grew more intense, almost palpable. I saw indistinct figures, like those in my nightmares, moving in the shadows, watching, waiting. Lara began to recite a spell in an ancient language, and the air around us became dense, almost suffocating. I felt myself being pulled into a vortex of darkness, my vision dimming. I struggled to stay conscious, to resist the overwhelming influence. I managed to reach the amulet Orion had given me, gripping it tightly. I felt a slight wave of warmth, a small flame of hope in the midst of the darkness. "You can't control me," I shouted, trying to break the bond. Lara hesitated for a moment, surprised by my resistance, but she quickly regained her sinister smile. "You are lost, can't you see?" she said. "There is no escape." With one last effort, I recited the purification spell Orion had taught me, feeling the energy flow through me. The shadows around us wavered but didn't disappear. Lara advanced, and the pressure on my chest returned with full force. I collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath, unable to fight the overwhelming power she exerted over me. Lara approached, her eyes shining with a malevolent triumph. "You will never escape me," she whispered, before everything faded into deep darkness. I woke up the next day in my own bed, the feeling of defeat weighing on me. Lara had not been defeated, and the bond between us seemed even stronger. I knew the battle was far from over, and that I needed to find a way to overcome her power and finally free my soul from her grasp. The days following the confrontation were a blur of fear and preparation. I knew Lara wouldn't give up, and I couldn't surrender either. I felt her constant presence, her power lurking in the shadows, but I also felt a renewed determination. With Orion's amulet and the knowledge I had gained, I was ready to face her again. I decided to perform the protection ritual on the next full moon, a moment of special power according to Orion's book. I prepared everything carefully: the salt circle, the white candles, the sacred herbs. I spent entire nights reciting the purification spells, strengthening my mind and spirit for the final confrontation. On the night of the full moon, the air was dense and electric, as if the world itself was aware of the approaching battle. I closed all the doors and windows of my apartment, creating a sacred space where Lara couldn't easily reach me. I lit the candles around the protection circle and began reciting the spells, feeling the energy flow through me. As I recited, the whispers began again, louder and more insistent than ever. Lara's presence was palpable, like a heavy shadow on my shoulders. The air around me started to ripple, and I saw the shadows dance on the walls, forming indistinct figures. "Do you really think you can defeat me?" Lara's voice echoed through the room, cold and disdainful. She appeared out of nowhere in astral projection form, materializing at the edge of the protection circle, her eyes shining with a sinister light. "I will break this spell," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I will free myself from you." She laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. "You are playing with forces you don't understand, but if you insist, then come. Show me what you're capable of." With each word, I felt the pressure increase. The shadows around Lara began to move faster, forming a spiral of darkness that seemed to engulf her. I recited the purification spell with all the strength I could muster, feeling the energy build and expand, pushing the shadows back. Lara raised her hand, and I felt a wave of dark energy hit the protection circle. The candles flickered, but the circle held firm. I gripped Orion's amulet tightly, channeling all my will to reinforce the barrier. "You can't escape from me," Lara shouted, advancing against the circle. I am your nightmare, your obsession. You belong to me. I closed my eyes, focusing on the words of the spell, visualizing the pure light that would protect me. I felt Lara's presence trying to invade my mind, her whispered words like poison, but I kept my focus. The energy of the protection circle grew, a luminous barrier that separated me from the darkness. Slowly, I felt the pressure decrease. The shadows around Lara began to waver, the spiral of darkness weakening. I continued reciting, my voice firmer with each word. The amulet in my hand glowed intensely, a light that seemed to cut through the very darkness. You can't defeat me, Lara shouted, her voice now tinged with despair. I am eternal. I am power. With one final effort, I recited the final spell, releasing all the accumulated energy in the protection circle. A wave of white light exploded around me, pushing Lara and the shadows back. She screamed, a sound of pure rage and pain, before disappearing completely, dissolved in the light. The room was silent, only the sound of my heavy breathing filling the air. The candles were still lit, the salt circle intact. I felt a strange and new peace, as if a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I stood up slowly, feeling exhaustion take over my body. I knew the battle was won, but the cost had been high. The scars from the experience were still fresh, and I knew it would take time to fully heal. Even so, I felt a sense of relief and liberation. Lara had been defeated, her spell broken, but the residual feeling of mystery remained, a reminder that the world is much deeper and more dangerous than I ever imagined. Minutes later, I received a call. It was Lara. You will never be completely free, she said with a voice filled with anger and a mix of malevolence. The bond is broken, but the mark remains. I stepped back, feeling a sense of fear and helplessness. But this time, I didn't let myself be dominated. I took a deep breath, remembering Orion's lessons and how I had just defeated her. I grabbed the amulet, feeling the comforting energy flow through me. But I am stronger now. You don't control me anymore, I said with a firm voice. Then she hung up the phone. I spent the following days in a state of recovery, cleansing my apartment of any traces of the rituals and strengthening my spiritual defenses. Lara's presence had disappeared, and she didn't call or message again, but her memory would never completely leave me. I learned to live with it, using the knowledge I gained to protect myself and others from similar threats. I knew my life would never be the same, but I was finally free. The darkness Lara had brought into my life had been banished, and now I could look to the future with hope, always vigilant but finally at peace.